My name is Mason Bardell, and I used to think I had it all figured out. At 37, I managed 6 restaurants across the metro area, drove a decent car, and lived in a house that impressed the neighbors. My wife, Aven, worked HR for a defense contractor, pulling in twice what I made. We looked good on paper, the kind of couple that made other people jealous at dinner parties. But looking good on paper and being happy are two entirely different things. The cracks started showing around Halloween last year. Richard, an old college buddy, threw his annual costume party at that renovated Victorian he'd been bragging about. I went as a boxer. Easy costume, just threw on some old gear from my amateur days. Aven spent weeks preparing her Catwoman outfit, ordering custom pieces online, practicing poses in the mirror. "You look incredible," I told her as we got ready. And she did. The black leather hugged every curve. The mask made her green eyes pop, and her confidence radiated like heat from a furnace. "Thanks," she said, barely glancing at me. Richard said Dominic and Susie would be there. She's doing Wonder Woman. Dominic Vasquez, factory supervisor, gym rat, the kind of guy who still talked about his high school football stats. His wife Susie had been Aven's best friend since college, one of those intense female friendships that made husbands feel like outsiders. The party was already in full swing when we arrived. Richard's place buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the clink of glasses. I grabbed a beer and watched Aven work the room. She had this gift for making everyone feel like the most interesting person alive. Within minutes, she was surrounded by admirers. "Mason!" Richard appeared at my elbow, dressed as a pirate. "Great turnout, right? Your wife's already the star of the show?" I followed his gaze. Aven stood near the fireplace, laughing at something Dominic had said. He was dressed as Tarzan, shirtless naturally, showing off the muscles he'd built during his midlife crisis. Susie hung on his arm in her Wonder Woman costume, but her attention was entirely on Aven. "They make quite the trio," I muttered. "What's that?" "Nothing. Great party, Rich." I spent the next hour making small talk with neighbors and coworkers, but my eyes kept drifting back to that fireplace. The 3 of them had formed their own little circle, heads close together, voices low. Occasionally one would throw back their head and laugh, and the others would join in like they shared some private joke. Around 10, I went to the kitchen for another beer. Aven and Dominic were there alone, standing closer than necessary while she mixed a drink. "The mask stays on," she was saying, her voice playful in a way I hadn't heard in months. "Promise?" Dominic's hand brushed her wrist as he reached for the bottle opener. "Cross my heart." They noticed me and stepped apart, but not quickly enough, not guilty enough, if that makes sense. Like they'd been caught doing something mildly inappropriate, not devastating. "Hey, babe," Aven said brightly. "Dom was just telling me about his promotion at the plant." "Congratulations," I said, though Dominic had been bragging about the same promotion for 6 months. "Thanks, man. Means more responsibility, but also more freedom. Flexible schedule, you know. Sometimes I can take long lunches, leave early, work from home." The way he emphasized those words, long lunches, leave early, made something cold settle in my stomach. But I just nodded and grabbed my beer. Later, as we were getting ready to leave, I overheard Susie talking to another friend. "Aven's so lucky," she was saying. "She can have any man she wants. Sometimes I think she and Dom were switched at birth. They have the same taste in everything." The friend laughed. Maybe they should have married each other. Maybe they should have. I pretended not to hear, but the words echoed in my head during the quiet drive home. Aven stared out the passenger window, still wearing that mask, lost in her own thoughts. "Fun party," I said. She didn't look at me. "You and Dominic seem to hit it off." Now she turned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just an observation. He's Susie's husband, Mason, and my friend. I know who he is." She went back to staring out the window. "Sometimes I don't understand you." That made 2 of us. The next few weeks passed in a blur of routine. Work, dinner, television, bed. Aven seemed distracted, always checking her phone, always finding reasons to work late or meet friends for drinks. When I asked about her day, she gave me headlines instead of details. "How was lunch with Susie?" "Fine." "What did you talk about?" "Work stuff, girl stuff, nothing you'd find interesting." She wasn't wrong about that last part, but the dismissal stung. We'd been married 8 years. When had I become someone she couldn't talk to? The answer came on a Tuesday evening in November. Aven was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a text preview. "Tonight? Can't wait to see you in just the mask." The sender was listed as D. I stared at those words until the screen went dark again. My hands started shaking. Not from anger, not yet, but from the terrible certainty that my marriage was over. Everything suddenly made sense. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she'd been pulling away for months. When Aven came out of the bathroom, toweling her hair, I was sitting on the bed with her phone in my hands. "Who's Dee?" I asked. She froze. For just a second, her mask slipped, and I saw panic in her eyes. Then she recovered, wrapping the towel tighter around herself. "What are you doing with my phone?" It buzzed. I saw the message. "That's private, Mason." "Is it Dominic?" "I don't know what you're talking about." But she did. I could see it in the way she wouldn't meet my eyes, the way her voice had gone flat and careful. This wasn't confusion or outrage at being falsely accused. This was someone who'd been caught. "How long?" I asked. "How long what?" "How long have you been sleeping with him?" "I'm not—" "Don't." The word came out harder than I intended. "Don't lie to me anymore, Aven. I can see it in your face." She sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking very small. "It's not what you think. What I think is that my wife is having an affair with her best friend's husband. What I think is that you've been lying to me for months. What I think is that everything I believed about our marriage was a joke." Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "Mason, please, let me explain." But I was already walking toward the door. "Explain it to your lawyer." That night, I slept in the guest room and started planning my next move. Because if there's one thing I learned from managing restaurants, it's that when someone steals from you, you don't just fire them. You make sure everyone knows exactly what they did. The next morning, Aven tried to act like nothing had happened. She made coffee, offered me breakfast, chatted about her schedule like we hadn't just discovered our marriage was a lie. I played along, watching her performance with a mixture of admiration and disgust. She was good at this, probably had been practicing for months. "I'll be late tonight," she said, buttering toast. "Team meeting with the new client." "Which client?" "The aerospace contractor. Big account, lots of compliance issues to work through." Another lie, delivered with perfect sincerity. I wondered how many others I'd swallowed without question. After she left for work, I called in sick and spent the day gathering evidence. 8 years of marriage had given me access to everything. Shared calendars, credit card statements, phone records. I'd always trusted Aven to handle the finances, never bothering to look too closely at the details. That trust was about to pay dividends. The calendar was the most revealing. For the past 4 months, Aven had been scheduling client meetings and training sessions that didn't appear on any work calendar I could access. They were always during business hours, always lasted 2 to 3 hours, and they perfectly matched gaps in Dominic's factory schedule that I cross-referenced through his wife Susie's social media posts. The credit card statements told their own story. Charges at hotels I'd never heard of, restaurants we'd never visited together, purchases at stores that catered to a very specific clientele. There was even a charge at a costume shop dated 3 days before Halloween. Apparently the Catwoman outfit had been a joint investment. But the real goldmine was the badge access logs from Aven's office building. As an HR manager, she had after-hours access for emergency situations. Those emergencies had been happening with suspicious frequency, always on days when I worked late at the restaurants. I compiled everything into a folder, making copies of the most damaging evidence. Then I made a phone call that would change everything. Melissa Vasquez speaking. "Mrs. Vasquez, this is Mason Bardell, Aven's husband. I think we need to talk." There was a long pause. "About what?" "About what our spouses have been doing together for the past 4 months." Another pause, longer this time. "Where do you want to meet?" We met at a coffee shop downtown, far from both our neighborhoods. Melissa was exactly what I'd expected, stunning in that high-maintenance way that required serious money and serious time. She was also furious, which made her a perfect ally. "I've suspected for weeks," she said, stirring her latte with sharp, angry motions. "Dom's been acting strange, making excuses, coming home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. When I confronted him, he said I was being paranoid." "What convinced you?" "I followed him last Tuesday. He said he was working late, but I drove by the plant and his car wasn't there. Found it parked outside your wife's office building instead." She pulled out her phone and showed me photos. Dominic's distinctive red pickup truck in Aven's parking garage, time-stamped at 7:30 p.m. Another photo showed them leaving together, his hand on the small of her back. "I wanted to confront them right then," Melissa continued, "but my lawyer friend advised me to gather evidence first, make it airtight." Smart lawyer. Very smart. She also suggested that if both betrayed spouses worked together, we'd have a much stronger position, especially if we made the confrontation public. I liked Melissa already. We spent the next hour comparing notes and planning our strategy. She had photos, bank statements showing suspicious charges, and testimony from neighbors who'd seen Dominic's truck at our house when I wasn't home. I had the digital evidence, calendars, badge logs, credit card statements. When do we move? I asked. Tomorrow, Wednesday morning, when her office is busiest. Maximum witnesses, maximum humiliation. You want to destroy her career along with her marriage? Melissa's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Mason, she's been having an affair with my husband in her workplace, using company resources, probably violating half a dozen HR policies. Her career destroyed itself. We're just making sure everyone notices. That evening, Aven came home 3 hours late with a story about printer problems and overtime paperwork. She was glowing in that particular way people glow after good physical activity, and her hair was slightly messed despite obvious attempts to fix it. How was your day? She asked, kissing my cheek like a dutiful wife. Quiet. Spent most of it thinking. About what? About us. About what we want from this marriage. She tensed slightly. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we should talk to someone. A counselor. Work through some of our issues. The relief on her face was almost comical. She thought I was talking about fixing our relationship, not ending it. I'd like that, she said. I really would. Good. I'll make some calls tomorrow. That night, she was more affectionate than she'd been in months, probably motivated by guilt. I played along, knowing it would be the last time. Tomorrow, everything would change. I barely slept, running through the plan in my head. Melissa and I had synchronized our watches, confirmed our evidence packets, and prepared for every possible response. We'd even contacted HR in advance, requesting a compliance witness for what we described as a sensitive workplace issue. At 10 a.m. sharp, I would walk into Aven's office with Melissa at my side. We would present our evidence in front of her entire team, with HR documentation to follow. By lunch, both affairs would be exposed, both marriages would be over, and both careers would be in serious jeopardy. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice, served public and cold. The alarm went off at 6 a.m. Aven was already awake, staring at the ceiling with a strange expression. Second thoughts about counseling? I asked. No, she said quietly. Just thinking about how much things are going to change. She had no idea how right she was. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp November weather that makes everything feel sharp and clear. I dressed carefully, my best suit, conservative tie, the kind of outfit that commanded respect in corporate environments. This wasn't about looking good, it was about looking credible. Melissa met me in the lobby of Aven's building at exactly 9:45 a.m. She looked professional and composed, carrying a leather briefcase that I knew contained financial records, photographs, and a timeline of the affair that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Ready? She asked. Let's end this. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt eternal. I watched the numbers climb and thought about all the times Aven had described her workplace, the open floor plan, the glass-walled offices, the way gossip traveled through the department like wildfire. Today, that architecture would work in our favor. Aven's office was in the corner, with windows overlooking the city and glass walls facing the main work area. Through those walls, I could see her team. 6 people clustered around computers, phones pressed to ears, the usual morning bustle of a busy HR department. Aven was at her desk, typing furiously, probably working on some report that would never be finished. She looked up when we knocked, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and growing horror as she realized who Melissa was. Mason, what are you doing here? We need to talk, I said, opening the door without waiting for permission. You, me, and Mrs. Vasquez. The typing in the outer office slowed, then stopped. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward the glass walls, sensing drama in the way that office workers always do. I'm in the middle of something, Aven said, but her voice was already shaking. Can we do this later? No, Melissa said firmly. We can't. I placed my folder on Aven's conference table and opened it, spreading documents across the polished surface like a dealer laying out cards. Calendar printouts, credit card statements, badge access logs, photographs, months of deception laid bare in black and white. What is this? Aven demanded, but she was staring at the evidence with the expression of someone who already knew exactly what it was. Proof, I said simply. Proof that you've been having an affair with Dominic Vasquez for the past 4 months. Proof that you've been using company resources to facilitate that affair. Proof that you've been lying to me, to Melissa, and probably to your employer about where you've been and what you've been doing. The outer office had gone completely silent. I could see faces pressed against the glass, phones forgotten, everyone straining to hear what was happening in their supervisor's office. Melissa stepped forward and added her own documents to the pile. Bank statements showing shared charges at hotels and restaurants. Photographs of your husband's vehicle in this building's parking garage during non-work hours. A timeline that matches every one of your supposed client meetings with gaps in his factory schedule. Aven's face had gone pale, but she tried to rally. This is harassment. You can't just barge into my workplace and... Actually, we can, I interrupted, because I called HR yesterday and requested a compliance witness for this meeting. They should be here any minute. As if summoned, there was another knock on the door. A woman in a gray suit entered, carrying a legal pad and wearing the expression of someone who'd seen this kind of drama before. I'm Janet Morrison from Human Resources, she said. I understand there's been a complaint filed regarding potential policy violations. That's correct, Melissa said. We have evidence that Mrs. Bardell has been conducting a personal relationship with a non-employee using company facilities and resources. Janet's expression didn't change, but she pulled out a digital recorder. Mrs. Bardell, are you willing to respond to these allegations? Aven looked around the room like a trapped animal. Through the glass walls, her entire team was watching. In the hallway, other employees had found excuses to walk by, drawn by the unmistakable energy of a career imploding in real time. This is a misunderstanding, she said finally. Yes, I've been spending time with Mr. Vasquez, but it's not what you think. He's been helping me with a personal matter and... What personal matter requires hotel rooms? Melissa asked sharply. And after-hours access to your office? I added. And charges at adult novelty stores? Melissa continued, holding up a credit card statement with certain lines highlighted. Aven's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around us, I could hear whispers from the outer office, the sound of a reputation crumbling in real time. Janet Morrison made notes on her legal pad. Mrs. Bardell, company policy clearly states that personal relationships cannot interfere with work responsibilities or utilize company resources. Do you have documentation showing these meetings were work-related? I can explain. But she couldn't explain, and we all knew it. The evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed, too damning. 4 months of careful deception had been unraveled in 15 minutes. There's more, I said, pulling out my phone. Audio recordings of conversations where Mrs. Bardell explicitly discusses personal matters with Mr. Vasquez, including references to costumes and masks that clearly aren't work-related. I played 30 seconds of audio. Aven's voice, unmistakably flirtatious, making plans that no married woman should be making with someone else's husband. The sound seemed to fill the office, spilling through the glass walls to the audience beyond. Janet Morrison stopped writing and looked up. Mrs. Bardell, I'm going to need you to surrender your access badge and any company devices while we conduct a full investigation. You'll be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of that investigation. You can't do this, Aven said, but her voice was barely a whisper. I have rights. I have projects that need to be completed. Your projects will be reassigned, Janet said matter-of-factly. Security will escort you out once you've gathered your personal belongings. I closed my folder and stood up. The divorce papers will be filed this afternoon. My lawyer will be in touch about asset division and custody arrangements. Melissa gathered her own documents. Dominic has already been suspended from his position pending their investigation. I thought you should know that your affair partner is facing the same consequences you are. We left Aven sitting at her desk, staring at the scattered evidence of her betrayal while her colleagues whispered and pointed through the glass walls. In the elevator, Melissa and I didn't speak until we reached the lobby. How do you feel? She asked. Like I just took out the trash, I said. How about you? Like I should have done this months ago. We parted ways in the parking garage, both of us heading home to begin the next phase of our lives. Behind us, Aven's career was ending in whispers and speculation, her reputation destroyed by her own choices. It was only the beginning. The news of Aven's office humiliation spread through our social circle like a virus. By Thursday evening, my phone was buzzing with calls and texts from friends who'd heard various versions of the story. Some were sympathetic, others curious, a few clearly fishing for gossip to share at their own dinner parties. I ignored most of them, but I did take a call from Zane Murphy, a lawyer friend who'd been my best man and had never particularly liked Aven. I heard you went nuclear, he said without preamble. Public confrontation, HR involvement, the whole corporate drama package. Word travels fast. Faster when it involves someone as high profile as your wife. She made enemies in that job, Mason. People are enjoying her downfall more than they probably should. That was interesting. What kind of enemies? The kind who remember being passed over for promotions, or having their ideas stolen, or being thrown under the bus when projects went wrong. Aven was good at her job, but she wasn't well liked. This gives them permission to say what they've been thinking for years. Zane was right. Over the next few days, I heard stories about Aven's workplace behavior that painted a very different picture from the professional competence she'd always claimed. Apparently, she'd been taking credit for other people's work, manipulating situations to make herself look good, and generally operating like someone who believed rules didn't apply to her. The affair wasn't an aberration. It was consistent with a pattern of entitlement that had been building for years. "So what's your next move?" Zane asked. "I'm thinking about that." "Well, when you decide, call me. I know some people who specialize in making life difficult for cheating spouses." I didn't need specialists. I had something better: intimate knowledge of everything Aven cared about, combined with a growing network of people who were happy to help destroy her. The first phase was social isolation. Aven had always been the center of our friend group, the one who organized dinner parties and weekend trips, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries. She cultivated relationships like a gardener tending flowers, always making sure she was essential to everyone's social life. But those relationships were shallower than they appeared. When people had to choose between the cheating wife and the wronged husband, the choice was easy. Within a week, Aven found herself uninvited from book club, dropped from the neighborhood wine group, and blocked from the group chat that coordinated weekend activities. Melissa was instrumental in this process. Her social network overlapped with ours, and she had a gift for sharing information in a way that seemed concerned rather than vindictive. "I'm just worried about Mason," she'd say. "He's handling this so well, but it must be devastating to discover that your marriage was a lie. And poor Aven. I hope she gets the help she clearly needs." The implication was clear. Aven was mentally unstable, Mason was the victim, and anyone who supported her was choosing the wrong side of a very obvious moral equation. The second phase was financial pressure. Our divorce attorney, recommended by Zane and ruthlessly efficient, had frozen most of our joint accounts pending asset division. Aven's salary had been her independence, her way of maintaining control. Without it, and without access to our savings, she was suddenly dependent on credit cards and family support. I made sure that dependence was as public as possible. On Saturday, Aven met her mother for lunch at the country club where they had been members for years. I knew about this lunch because Susie had mentioned it before the affair exploded. Apparently it was a monthly tradition, a chance for Aven to show off her success to a woman who'd never thought she was good enough. I also knew that Aven's credit cards had been maxed out during the affair, funding hotel rooms and expensive dinners and gifts for Dominic. When the server ran her card to pay for lunch, it was declined. Publicly. In front of her mother and half the country club's membership. I wasn't there to see it, but Melissa's sister was, and she provided a detailed account. Aven's face went bright red as she fumbled through her purse, looking for another card. Her mother's expression shifted from embarrassment to anger as she realized she'd have to cover the bill. The whispered conversations at nearby tables were audible enough that everyone understood exactly what was happening. "Financial infidelity," Melissa's sister reported. "That's what people are calling it. The idea that Aven spent their savings on her affair while Mason was working to support them both." It wasn't entirely accurate. Our finances were more complicated than that. But accuracy wasn't the point. The point was creating a narrative where Aven was the villain in every possible way. The third phase was professional destruction. Janet Morrison from HR had been thorough in her investigation, interviewing Aven's colleagues, reviewing security footage, and documenting every policy violation she could find. The results were exactly what we'd hoped for. Aven was terminated for cause. No severance, no reference letters, no graceful transition to another position. Her personnel file would show misconduct, making it nearly impossible to find comparable work in her field. 8 years of building a career, gone because she couldn't keep her hands off someone else's husband. But the professional consequences extended beyond just losing her job. Aven had been working on several high-profile projects, including compliance reviews for government contracts. Her termination triggered investigations into all of those projects, questioning whether her personal conduct had compromised her professional judgment. It hadn't. Aven was many things, but she wasn't incompetent. But the investigations created a paper trail that would follow her for years. Any future employer who did a thorough background check would find red flags that would be difficult to explain. By the end of the second week, Aven was unemployed, financially dependent, socially isolated, and facing a divorce that would leave her with a fraction of the assets she'd expected. She was also dealing with the fallout from Dominic's own professional destruction. His factory job was gone, his reputation in shambles, his marriage over. The man she'd thrown away her life for was now unemployed, homeless, and desperately trying to convince his wife to take him back. Not exactly the romantic fantasy she'd been pursuing. I felt a brief moment of sympathy for her. watching her world collapse in real time. Then I remembered the months of lies, the casual betrayal, the way she'd looked at me with such contempt when I'd asked about her day. The sympathy passed quickly. On Friday evening, as I was leaving one of my restaurants after the dinner rush, I found Dominic waiting by my car. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing clothes that hadn't been washed recently, with the desperate energy of a man who'd lost everything and was looking for someone to blame. "We need to talk," he said. "No, we don't. You destroyed my life, man. My job, my marriage, everything. For what? Because your wife was unhappy?" I stopped walking and turned to face him. My wife was unhappy, so she decided to cheat instead of asking for a divorce. You were unhappy, so you decided to cheat instead of working on your marriage. Both of you made choices, Dominic. I just made sure those choices had consequences. It wasn't supposed to be like this. What was it supposed to be like? You thought you could have an affair without anyone getting hurt? You thought your wife and I would just quietly accept being betrayed? He stepped closer, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. You could have handled this privately, worked things out like adults. Instead, you had to humiliate us, destroy our careers, turn everyone against us. You humiliated yourselves, I said calmly. I just made sure people noticed. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Your affair is over, your marriage is over, your job is over. Go home, Dominic. Figure out what you're going to do with the rest of your life. I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing in the parking lot like the broken man he'd become. In my rearview mirror, I watched him kick a trash can and storm off into the night. It was pathetic, but it was also satisfying. 2 weeks ago, he'd been confident enough to pursue another man's wife. Now he was unemployed and desperate, reduced to confronting me in parking lots because he had nowhere else to direct his anger. The transformation was almost artistic in its completeness. The anonymous letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my front door while I was at work. Plain white envelope, no return address, my name written in block letters that could have belonged to anyone. Inside was a single photograph. Aven and me at our wedding 8 years ago, both of us smiling at the camera with the kind of happiness that seemed genuine. Across the bottom, someone had written in red ink, "You don't know the half of it." I stared at that photo for a long time, trying to figure out what it meant. The affair with Dominic was over, both their careers were destroyed, and the divorce was proceeding exactly as planned. What didn't I know? The answer came from an unexpected source. Susie Vasquez called me that evening, her voice shaky with alcohol and emotion. She'd been notably absent from the fallout, neither defending her husband nor condemning him, just disappearing from our social circle like she'd never existed. "I need to tell you something," she said without preamble, "about Aven and Dominic." "I think I know enough about Aven and Dominic." "No, you don't. The affair, it wasn't what you think it was." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What do you mean? Can we meet? I can't do this over the phone?" We met at a bar across town, somewhere neither of us was likely to run into anyone we knew. Susie looked terrible, hollow-eyed, thin, like she hadn't been sleeping or eating properly. She ordered a double whiskey and drank half of it before she started talking. "Dominic wasn't the real affair," she said. "He was cover." "Cover for what?" "For me and Aven." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there trying to process what she'd just said, while the bar noise continued around us like nothing had changed. "You and Aven," I repeated slowly. "For 3 years, since right after you guys bought the house. It started as friendship, then became something else, and then became this whole elaborate thing where we had to hide it from everyone. Including me and Dominic. Especially you and Dominic." She finished her whiskey and signaled for another. "Aven said you'd never understand, that you were too conventional, too judgmental. She said if you found out, you'd try to destroy her life. So you used Dominic as a cover story." "We used him, and we used the idea of him. Made it look like he was pursuing her, like she was tempted but resisting. Then we made it look like she'd finally given in. The whole time, it was really about us." My mind was racing, reframing everything I thought I knew about the past few months. The secretive phone calls, the late nights, the way Aven had seemed so distant. It hadn't been about Dominic at all. "But the evidence," I said. "The hotel charges, the meetings, all of it. All real, just not with Dominic. He was there sometimes as an alibi, but mostly it was me and Aven. The credit card charges were for our trips, our dinners, our activities." "And Dominic knew about this?" Susie's laugh was bitter. "Dominic knew enough to play along. Aven promised him that if he helped us maintain the cover story, she'd help him get a promotion at his plant. She had connections through her job, people who could make calls. So he was being used too. We were all being used. You, me, him. Aven was the one pulling all the strings, making all the plans. She said it was the only way we could be together without destroying our marriages. But she was willing to destroy our marriages anyway. Only when she thought she could control the narrative, make it look like she'd made a mistake with Dominic, that she was sorry, that she wanted to work things out with you. Then she could divorce you quietly later, after the scandal died down, and we could be together, openly. I thought about the anonymous letter, the wedding photo with its cryptic message. You sent me that picture. I had to. After everything that happened, the office confrontation, the job losses, watching Dominic get destroyed for something he barely participated in, I couldn't let you go on thinking you knew the truth when you only knew part of it. Why now? Why not weeks ago? Because I loved her. Susie's voice broke on those words. Because even after she threw me away to save herself, even after she let Dominic take all the blame, I still loved her. But watching what happened to you, what happened to him, I couldn't live with it anymore. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. Everything I'd thought I knew about my marriage, about the affair, about Aven herself, had been wrong. Not completely wrong, but wrong enough that my revenge had been misdirected. What happens now? I asked. I don't know. Dominic still doesn't know the whole truth. He thinks the affair was real, that Aven chose you over him. He's been calling her, begging her to run away with him, promising to make it work somehow. And Aven? Aven is pretending none of this ever happened. She's moved back in with her parents, telling everyone that she made a mistake with Dominic, but that you're being vindictive about the divorce. She's positioning herself as the victim of your cruelty. That sounded exactly like something Aven would do. Even caught in a lie, even exposed and humiliated, she'd find a way to make herself the injured party. There's something else, Susie said. Something you need to know before you decide what to do next. What? She's planning to take your daughter. The words hit me like ice water. What do you mean, take her? Custody. She's claiming that your behavior during the divorce proceedings shows you're unstable, vindictive, not suitable for primary custody. She's got her lawyer arguing that Emma would be better off living with her full time. Emma was 7 years old, smart and funny and completely innocent of the adult drama swirling around her. The idea of Aven using her as a weapon in this war made me angrier than anything else that had happened. She can't do that, I said. She thinks she can. Her lawyer thinks the public nature of your confrontation, the way you humiliated her at work, makes you look like someone who prioritizes revenge over family stability. I prioritized honesty over comfortable lies. I know that. You know that. But in a custody hearing, it might not matter. I paid for our drinks and walked Susie to her car. Before she got in, she turned back to me. I'm sorry, she said. For all of it. For the lies, for letting you think it was just about Dominic, for not telling you sooner. You deserved better than what we did to you. What are you going to do now? Start over, I guess. Figure out who I am when I'm not living a lie. I watched her drive away, then sat in my own car for a long time, thinking about everything she'd told me. The affair had been worse than I'd thought. More elaborate, more calculated, more deliberately cruel. But it had also been different than I'd thought, which meant my response needed to be different too. Dominic had been a victim almost as much as I had been. Aven had manipulated all of us, using our trust and our assumptions against us. And now she was trying to manipulate the legal system to take my daughter away from me. It was time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. I pulled out my phone and called Zane. I need your help, I said when he answered. And I need it to be absolutely ruthless. What's the situation? My wife has been playing a much deeper game than I realized, and I just found out she's planning to use our daughter as her final weapon. Then we'd better make sure she doesn't get the chance. The real war was just beginning. The neighborhood block party was Aven's idea, proposed through her mother as a way to rebuild community relationships and show that she was committed to moving forward positively. What she really wanted was a public forum where she could play the role of wronged but gracious wife, garnering sympathy for her custody case. I decided to give her exactly the public forum she wanted. You're sure about this? Zane asked as we set up the projection equipment in my backyard. Once we do this, there's no taking it back. She's trying to take my daughter, I said. There's no taking that back either. The party was scheduled for Saturday evening, a casual gathering with barbecue and drinks, and the kind of forced, neighborly cheer that suburban communities specialized in. Aven had been working the crowd all week, stopping by houses with homemade cookies and carefully rehearsed explanations about how the divorce was unfortunate but amicable, and how she hoped everyone could support Emma during this difficult transition. What the neighbors didn't know was that I'd spent the week gathering new evidence, armed with Susie's revelations about the true nature of the affair. The security cameras I'd installed months earlier had captured more than I'd initially realized, and a careful review of the footage told a very different story than the one Aven was now promoting. The party started at 6, with neighbors arriving in the casual uniform of suburban gatherings, polo shirts and sundresses, craft beer and wine coolers, conversations about lawn care and school board elections. Aven arrived with her parents, looking appropriately subdued but hopeful, the picture of a woman trying to rebuild her life after a painful mistake. I played the gracious host, grilling burgers and making small talk, waiting for the right moment. Emma was at her grandmother's house for the weekend. I'd made sure she was nowhere near what was about to happen. Around 7:30, as the sun was setting and people were settling in for the evening, I made my move. "If I could have everyone's attention," I called out, tapping a beer bottle with a knife. I wanted to thank you all for coming tonight and for supporting both Aven and me during this difficult time." Aven smiled nervously, probably wondering where this was going, but hoping for some kind of public reconciliation that would help her custody case. "As most of you know, our marriage is ending because of choices that were made, trust that was broken, and lies that were told. I think it's important that everyone understands exactly what happened, so there are no misunderstandings going forward." I gestured toward the projection screen I'd set up against the back fence. "I've prepared a little presentation that should clear everything up." The first image that appeared was a timeline, professionally formatted and easy to read. It showed 3 years of deception, with dates, locations, and participants clearly marked. Not just the recent affair with Dominic, but the longer, more elaborate affair with Susie that had been hidden behind it. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. Aven's face went white, then red, as she realized what was happening. "This is harassment," she said loudly. "Mason, you can't do this." "Actually, I can," I replied calmly. "This is my property. These are my neighbors, and this is evidence that will be presented in our custody hearing anyway. I'm just sharing it with people who have a right to know the truth." The next slide showed financial records. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, purchases at stores that catered to couples looking to spice up their relationships. All of it paid for with our joint credit cards while I was working 60-hour weeks to support what I thought was a stable family. 3 years, I said to the crowd. 3 years of elaborate lies, manipulated schedules, and calculated deception, using our neighbors, our friends, and even Dominic Vasquez as unwitting accomplices in a scheme that betrayed multiple marriages and families. Dominic was there, standing near the back of the crowd with a beer in his hand and confusion on his face. As the presentation continued, that confusion shifted to understanding, then to anger as he realized how completely he'd been used. The final slides were the most damaging, screenshots of text messages between Aven and Susie, recovered from cloud backups that showed the calculated nature of their deception, plans to manipulate custody proceedings, discussions of how to frame me as unstable and vindictive, strategies for using Emma as leverage in the divorce. "My wife didn't just betray our marriage," I concluded. "She betrayed the trust of everyone in this room, manipulated people who cared about her, and is now trying to use our 7-year-old daughter as a weapon in a war she started." The silence that followed was deafening. 30 neighbors stood in my backyard, staring at evidence of a deception so elaborate and cruel that it redefined their understanding of the woman they thought they knew. Aven tried to rally. "This is all taken out of context," she said, her voice shaking. "Mason is twisting everything to make me look bad because he can't accept that our marriage failed." "Our marriage didn't fail," I said quietly. "It was sabotaged, for 3 years, by someone who preferred lies to honesty, manipulation to communication, and betrayal to divorce." That's when Dominic stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "You used me," he said to Aven. "You made me think we had something real, let me destroy my marriage, lose my job, humiliate myself, and it was all just cover for your real affair?" "Dom, let me explain." "Explain what? How you promised to help my career if I played along with your games? How you let me take the blame for everything while you were really sleeping with my wife?" The crowd was riveted now, watching the drama unfold like a soap opera playing out in real time. Aven's parents looked mortified, her mother clutching her father's arm as their daughter's reputation disintegrated in front of their social circle. "This is insane," Aven said, looking around desperately for support. "You're all believing lies and manipulated evidence from a man who's clearly having some kind of breakdown." But the evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed, too obviously authentic. And the neighbors weren't stupid. They'd seen the signs, heard the rumors, noticed the inconsistencies in Aven's stories over the past few weeks. Mrs. Patterson from next door spoke up first. "Aven, honey, maybe you should just go home." Others nodded in agreement. The sympathy Aven had been cultivating evaporated in minutes, replaced by disgust and disappointment. These were people who valued honesty, stability, and family loyalty. What they just witnessed violated every principle they held dear. Aven's mother stepped forward and took her daughter's arm. "Come on," she said quietly. "We're leaving." As they walked toward the front of the house, Aven turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Mason. You think you've won, but this isn't over." "Yes, it is," I said. "Your lies are exposed, your manipulation is documented, and your credibility is destroyed. The custody hearing will be a formality now." After they left, the party slowly returned to normal, though the conversations were more subdued and focused on what everyone had just witnessed. People approached me throughout the evening to offer support, to express shock at what they'd learned, and to assure me that they'd be happy to testify on my behalf if needed. Dominic stayed until the end, helping me clean up in silence. Finally, as we were putting away the last of the chairs, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it. I should have known something was wrong, should have questioned what was happening instead of just going along with it." "We were both manipulated," I replied. "The difference is that you were single when it started. I was married to the person doing the manipulating." "What happens now?" "Now we both start over, build new lives based on truth instead of lies." He nodded and shook my hand before walking away into the night. It wasn't friendship, too much had happened for that, but it was understanding. We'd both been victims of the same elaborate deception, and we'd both paid the price for trusting someone who didn't deserve it. The next morning, Zane called with news from his contacts in the legal community. "Aven's lawyer is withdrawing from the case," he said. "Apparently last night's presentation made it clear that her custody claims were based on false premises. No competent attorney wants to argue that a father who exposed his wife's deception and manipulation is unfit for custody." "And the financial settlement?" "She'll get what the law requires, nothing more. Given the evidence of financial infidelity and the length of the deception, that won't be much." "Good." "Mason, you did the right thing. It was brutal, but it was right. Emma will grow up knowing that her father fought for truth and wouldn't let himself be destroyed by lies." That was what mattered most. Not revenge, not public vindication, but ensuring that my daughter would be raised by someone who valued honesty over manipulation, integrity over convenience. The war was over. Truth had won.